Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us tonight for our fifth installment of Applause at Home. We're very pleased to have some wonderful special guests this evening. But first, I'd just like to take a few minutes to say thank you to Ridge Street Kitchen and Kelly and all of the wonderful volunteers that are a part of our applause committee who organized a wonderful meal for folks to pick up from Kelly and enjoy for this evening in connection with this concert. So as you know, we've put together a program called American Landscapes for you. And this evening's menu was curated by Kelly based on a farm to table event that we held around this time last year after the festival that Jerry Gasparet, one of our volunteers, organized on behalf of Breckenridge Music. So thank you to everyone who got that meal, who took part in making phone calls and texts to folks to make it as easy as possible. And I hope everybody is enjoying it now or has already enjoyed it or will enjoy it. I actually ate the dessert first. I'm not going to lie, it was delicious. So one of the reasons is because I just found out what my daughter's school schedule is going to be. So it warranted dessert first. But in any case, we're so glad that you're here with us. Thank you to each of you, our donors, for being here. We're so glad to offer you this program this evening. So just a couple of minor little things before we get started about how to use the tool and interact with us as we move forward into tonight's program. If you hover your mouse down at the bottom of your screen, we encourage you to use the chat function. You can open that window now by clicking on it, and you can simply type a message in the bottom for everyone to see, or you can speak privately to anybody here as a part of our call. So we encourage you to ask questions, get to know us and take this moment on Zoom to engage in a different way. You can also use, and I've noticed some people have chosen to do this, you can also use the reactions button to applaud after a piece or to give a thumbs up. So for example, if you are eating right now the meal from Ridge Street Kitchen, you can click on the reaction button and click a thumbs up to let us know that you were part of that special piece of organization that our applause committee did. So I know the Saucevilles did order it. I don't see, where are they? They might be eating it now with their video turned off. But there they are. Hi, Dick and Jean. So as we begin our program tonight, we will automatically mute you during the musical performances. And then at the end of the performance, similar to if you joined us in our Bourbon Street Boogie Zoom event, we will then unmute everybody and give you a chance at the end of the show to talk to each other, to react, to ask questions of our musicians live and in person, so and to chat with your friends. So we really enjoyed that last time and wanted to continue that effort here tonight. So just a bit about what to expect now that you know how to use the Zoom tool. Tonight we have a very interesting program of American music for you. We will mix archival recordings of our performance in 2019 of Copland's Appalachian Spring for 13 players. This is a beautiful performance led by artistic director and conductor Stephen Schick that we not only performed here in Breckenridge at the Riverwalk Center, but also had the privilege of of performing at the Gerald Ford Amphitheater with Vale Dance and the Martha Graham Dance Company. So that was a real delight. And you'll hear, Steve will take you through this. You'll hear some of the most beloved excerpts from this piece sprinkled throughout some other performances that we have. We're glad to welcome back Tobin Chodos, our pianist and arranger and composer that we originally had slated for 2 Ellington pieces as a part of our last week of performances in 2020. So he'll bring those to you live tonight. And then we will move on to our principal flutist, Jessica Petrasic, and her husband, Joe, who is an amazing percussionist and also a member of the Atlanta Symphony. And so we're really eager to see some familiar faces and to welcome back Jessica to this show tonight. Jessica, unfortunately, was having some construction done. And so we were hoping to bring her performance live, but we have a beautiful video that she will introduce with Steve and share with you this evening. And lastly, we have our principal bassoon, TK DeWitt, with us from the Kansas City Symphony. And he too will bring a piece of bassoon solo literature from the American repertoire. And we're very eager to share more. And I will let our artistic director and conductor, Steve, take it from here and introduce each of our musicians and really start the show tonight. So again, thank you for being with us, and feel free to jump in and ask questions and use that chat.
Thank you, Tamara, and welcome everybody. I'm so pleased to see you all. We've been doing this, as you know, every other Friday for a while, and I've come to look forward to these as sort of this regular rhythm of the summer. And I also notice that we have more and more participants each time. So my hat's off to Applause and to the entire team that Tamara has put together. Now, Tamara told you a lot about what we can expect, and you notice that it's chock full of music, so I won't speak very much. But we do want to take a listen to some American music. We can talk about, if you would care to, what makes this music American, how it represents this country, this landscape. And we'll just have a chance to also chat with the musicians who are playing. And also, as Tamara said, we'll frame all of the music that will be played by Breckenridge musicians with a recording we did last year of the excerpts from a recording we did of Appalachian Spring. So let me just start by telling you a little bit about Appalachian Spring, and I will not do this for every excerpt, but I think to start off with some notion of what this piece is would be a great thing. So Appalachian Spring was premiered at the Library of Congress in 1944, and really in the darkest days of the Second World War, when there had been years of deprivation because of the war. It was choreographed by Martha Graham, who danced the title role at that point, and the set was made by the great Japanese artist Isamu Noguchi. And the original version of this piece was for 13 players, and that's what you're about to hear. And it was a set of fantastic tunes interspersed with kind of traveling music, as you would in a ballet. And we played the entirety of it last summer and also in 2016. Many of people know this piece on the basis of the orchestral suite, which was extracted from it, basically taking the greatest hits. We'll do a version of that today. A lot of times, well, let's put it this way. I will confess that when I first heard Appalachian Spring, I thought it was about springtime in Appalachia, but in fact, it's about water, about a spring of water. And although Copland's title was something fairly anodyne, like Ballet for Martha, Martha Graham suggested this title because of her love for a Hart Crane poem. And that poem goes like this, very short, this excerpt. "Oh, Appalachian Spring, I gained the ledge, steep, inaccessible smile that eastward bends and northward reaches in that violet wedge of Adirondacks." So the spring is this source of life and the source of energy and the center of the fertility of this landscape. And so it seems to me that it is perfectly fitting to use the piece as a source of life and this is the center of the landscape that we all know and love. So I think without further ado, Monica, if you don't mind, why don't we listen to a little bit of Appalachian Spring and we can talk about that afterwards. We didn't know where to stop. You wanted to hear the whole piece, I realize, but that would take us at least until 7:30 tonight. So you'll pardon the perfunctory stop. But wow, what great memories. And TK is on that recording. It sounds fantastic. And though Jessica, we played this together on another year, that was also a wonderful memory. And one of the things about that piece that I just remember listening to it is how, not only how beautiful it is, but how spacious it is. And when you look at the opening pages of the score, what you're seeing are long notes, half notes, empty space all over the place. And so there is a kind of metaphorical quality with the enormity, the amplitude of the space about which the piece was written. And I'll never forget especially the dress rehearsal in Vail, playing this piece in that extraordinary setting in the middle of the afternoon with the sun on the mountains and everything like that. It was perfect. I'll also never forget the evening in that the video monitor that we needed in the pit in order to get these very sharply coordinated cues went completely blank. And it was just blank. And I thought, well, I kind of remember how long things take, but it was really, Monica rushed in, I think with a broom to whack the television set and saved the day for us all. But there were probably the longest 5 minutes of my professional conducting life waiting for the monitor to come back on. In any event, I'm sorry, that was just a little memory that came unbidden to the front as I listened to the piece. But it is beautiful and not easy to play, and so beautifully played by the ensemble. So we'll come back to Copland and we'll talk more about what makes that in particular American music. But I'd like to now turn to Tobin and to Ellington, one of the 20th century's greatest composers, and certainly a figure that we increasingly see as central in the American identity. Tobin, first of all, welcome back. It's really great to see you again and to have you back. And so I'd like to just tell you a little bit about, well, I mean, let me start with Ellington. I have a little biography of everybody here. So Ellington was born in 1899 in Washington. He died in 1974. I had the amazing good fortune of seeing the Ellington Band with Ellington at the piano just the year before he died in 1973. And so this is also an incredible memory of mine. And even in his earliest stages, when he was working really almost exclusively with jazz ensemble-sized groups, the music was so infused with orchestral color that in a kind of post-World War II revival of his music after the war, when everybody was back and the economy was booming, he was led into compositional paths that included orchestral suites, an opera, oratorio, large-scale forms. This was already embedded at the beginning of his life. We welcome Tobin back, and we know that Tobin just got his PhD from UC San Diego. Again, congratulations there. And the thing about Tobin that I've most admired in the years that we've known each other is the ability to kind of coalesce several different kinds of activities that don't actually, frankly, often find a home in a single person's mind. So a scholar, a writer, an improviser, a composer, a pianist. And so the list is so long that, first of all, frankly, I don't really know how you do it. So my only question for you, Tobin, is how do you do it? Welcome back, first of all, and thank you for coming back to play.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you very much for those kind words. I think my approach to music and my approach to scholarship are basically kind of the same. I try to approach. I think the next project always comes out of the previous one, and I'm always trying to solve the problem that I faced and do a slightly better job than I did last time. So sometimes that leads me to scholarship, sometimes to music. And I'm never quite sure which one I'm going to do next.
But can I ask you? Do you think is this a reason that you have such affinity for Ellington? Because I know you do. Your compositions are equally colorful, but I think of Ellington also improviser, trained pianist. He was a writer. He wrote a beautiful book, an autobiography. Music is My Mistress. He worked in all of these different areas. Is the kind of polymathic aspect of Ellington part of what it appeals to you?
I think that's definitely true. I think it's true of the jazz tradition in general that the distinction between performer, composer, interpreter, and sometimes singer, sometimes performer, band leader, it's a lot more fluid in the jazz tradition than it is in the Euro-American tradition. So in that regard, yeah, it's something I definitely do share with Ellington. Yeah, Ellington perhaps more than most. You're right. I mean, he really was deliberate about wanting to be a composer of fully notated music as well as an improviser, and definitely a role model of mine in that regard. Yeah.
And yet it took us so long to understand Ellington in his totality. You'll talk a little bit about the pieces before you play them, but I have to mention to everybody that Ellington did receive a posthumous Pulitzer Prize. But the tragedy was that he was shortlisted for the 1965 Pulitzer Prize, and that year no prize was awarded. And it is a shock to me that within the lifetimes of so many of us, that a talent of the luminosity of Ellington's could not be recognized in the hallowed halls of classical music. So it has taken us a really long time to get the memo, frankly. And well, I guess maybe we're so pleased to be able to get the memo in sonic form. So why don't I stop talking? You can say whatever you would like to about the pieces, and let's listen to them. I'm really looking forward.
Sure. So I'm going to play the two pieces that I arranged for orchestra and would have been playing with the orchestra had we been able to convene in person. The first is Mood Indigo, and the second is Solitude. I think I'll just introduce the first one first, and then I'll introduce the second one second. The thing about Mood Indigo, sort of the heart and soul of this piece is its very, very simple theme, a half note and two quarter notes, which is deceptively simple and has deceived listeners throughout the 20th century in one particularly interesting way. It's easy to interpret in sort of a naive fashion as a stack of triads, but Ellington, in his many, many different arrangements of this piece, and he did have lots of different ones, he consistently orchestrates the melody with the low instruments high and the high instruments low, and he braids them in and out in a very disorienting timbral gesture, and he does it every time he rearranges this piece. So grappling with that, I'll just play a simple version of those three triads. Grappling with the timbral quality that he was so committed to in this piece is sort of the central challenge of it for an arranger and also for a performer. So I just thought I'd flag that before I play it. And without further ado, I'll play Mood Indigo now. Thank you.
That's wonderful. It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And shall I go on? I'll go on to Solitude. Okay, so what I have to say about Solitude is um, whenever I'm teaching this music, jazz music or blues music, I find myself reminding my students that while we think of having the blues as a condition of sadness, the blues music is actually not a sad music, but a way of coping with sadness. In particular, a way of coping with sadness that involves humor and laughter. And I think that is true in general of the blues tradition and the jazz tradition. However, this piece really is a sad piece. Solitude is a piece, it's about the saddest thing ever, which is being alone. You know, the lyrics, although Ellington didn't write them, I think really do a good job of communicating sort of the spirit of the piece. It's, you know, in my solitude, you haunt me with memories of days gone by, and things like that. Really, truly sad and almost fearful quality to this music. So there's one little simple theme, again, that kind of sits alone in this sea of harmony that Ellington has built around it. And it's one very lonely little theme that winds its way through all the chords. So I'll play a short version of Solitude.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And, I can't help thinking of what that would have been like in your extraordinary arrangements for orchestra with you as soloist. But thank you so much for doing that. I'm going to scan the chat box to make sure that no one wants to ask you a question, but I'm going to take the prerogative of having an open mic right now to ask you something, which is, do you feel, you talked about the blues, and the one thing about the blues, and I just wonder if you feel that this is true, is that whenever it's sad, it's never really sentimental, and that there's a kind of uprightness about the expression. It never really kind of wallows in the sadness. It's a way of getting through that. I know that's more or less what you said, but can you think of any examples with it where that's not true? Because I can't at the moment really think of an example of where it ever kind of collapses into something that is more sentimental than what you did.
I mean, no, I cannot picture a sentimental work of blues music or jazz music. I think they really are almost antithetical. I think you're right about that. Which is not to say, I mean, jazz musicians of the early 20th century were actually, they were fairly clear about that. That the blues was a way of coping with, well, a way of coping with sadness and a way of coping with pain, and in particular, a way of coping with the legacy of the history of racial crimes in this country. Yep. And James Baldwin is the most famous example who sort of theorized jazz and blues music this way, but the musicians themselves did as well.
Yeah, and I think that's just absolutely fascinating. The music can be tragic, it can be searing, it can be a lot of things, but it's never superficially sad. And I think that that's really something to take away. Those are just gorgeous pieces. And partly I'm trying to buy time for anybody who would like to ask. I don't see anything, but perhaps we'll have a chance to talk later if there are other questions when we come to that point, when we come to the party part of it. But anyway, let's everybody give, if you would like to unmute or use your reactions button, let's thank Tobin for those beautiful performances. So that is just great. Thank you so much. Wonderful. It is interesting to think about how American music deals with trials and tribulations. And so as we get ready to go back to Appalachian Spring for another short excerpt, one of the reasons that this was so hopeful in the context of the Second World War is that the story of the ballet itself is about a pioneer wedding, a sort of a young frontier couple on their wedding day. And that idea that families would come back together, that there would be the start of new life, was so in need in the late days of 1944, that part of what Copland was doing is putting a placeholder for what actually became, I suppose, in the most honest assessment, those of us in the boomer generation. So the seed was planted with the idea that families would return, that they would settle, that they would build homes together, et cetera, and have kids. And so this was the sentiment that was most inspiring to the people at the time. And so as we get ready to listen to another excerpt, we're going to hear Copland. If I remember what the excerpt is, we'll hear Copland at his rhythmic best, and his ability to maintain extraordinary amounts of musical density while keeping all of the levels clear, all of the lines clear from one another. And it's really just such a formidable composition. So without any more talking from me, let's take another listen to a little bit of Appalachian Spring from our performance last year. Again, what a horrible place to stop, but we had to choose something. And for those of you who know the Graham choreography, well, actually, let's put it this way. If you don't know the Graham choreography, you can imagine a lot of boot slapping and do-si-doing around that really, really, really rhythmic music. And that's the other side of the Copland musical life. We have the opening and the closing of this piece, which is so spacious and full of chances to hear the harmonic development, and then we have this incredibly rhythmic kind of music that drives, and we're going to keep moving, and we'll hear a little bit more rhythmic music. Actually, we're going to hear a lot of different kinds of things when we hear what Jessica and Joe have provided for us, and so it gives me really, really great pleasure to welcome Jessica Petrasik and Joe Petrasik. Jessica is, in addition to being the principal flute of the Breckenridge Music Festival Orchestra, she's acting principal of the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra and an alumna of Princeton and Rice Universities, and she lives in Atlanta. So Jessica and Joe, I'm not going to complain about how hot it is in coastal Southern California right now to you, although for us it's a little bit steamy. And Joe is principal percussion of the Atlanta Symphony. I am a huge fan of Joe's playing, and when he played with us, it always made me a little nervous. He's such a fine percussionist, such a fine musician, and also of the principal percussionist of the Colorado Music Festival Orchestra, an alumnus of UCLA and Temple University, and he's on the faculty of University of Miami Frost School of Music. And this is in your biography, Jessica and Joe, so I hope you don't mind my mentioning. It's why we always read to the end. You're expecting the arrival of your daughter around Christmas. So congratulations from all of you, and this is just such wonderful news. And we're going to hear a little bit from Lou Harrison, and I'd like to have you talk a little bit about the piece, but let me mention that Harrison was born in 1917 and died in 2003. He was an American experimentalist, and he explored as a part of his music the cultural confluences of the West Coast. So you find Asian music mixed with compositional practices of the European canon. He worked a lot with percussion, which is one of the reasons we love him so much. And I'm sorry, I forgot I have an instrument that Harrison owned on the piano, but it's in the next room. I'm not able to bring it in now. I meant to do that for you. And he worked with John Cage in the 1930s and 40s, but when Cage moved to New York, he stayed in California. His lifelong partner, the inventor and instrument designer Bill Colvig, was an important part of both obviously his personal life, but also his musical life. So Jessica and Joe, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this. And would you like to tell us a little bit about what we're about to hear? And can you hear me?
Okay. Hi, everyone. There we go. Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you, everybody, for bearing with our broken internet. However, this was recorded today, very, very recently. So it's very close, as close to being live as we could make it. And hopefully you're all understanding us with our cellular data right now. So good. Okay, great. I was a classics major in college a million years ago. And so I love any piece of music that has Greek mythology influence in it. And I found that in this Lou Harrison piece, Ariadne, I first encountered the story of Ariadne in high school when I translated in Latin class Ovid's Metamorphoses, and then Catullus' mini epic poem, Catullus 64, which is an entire ekphrasis about the grief of Ariadne being abandoned. So the story is that Theseus, the prince of Greece at the time, came from Athens as a sacrifice for the Minotaur in the labyrinths. And Princess Ariadne was the daughter of the inventor of the labyrinth, and she had a magical golden thread that she provided Theseus to guide him in and out of the labyrinth and helped him defeat the Minotaur. As a reward for helping him, Theseus agreed to marry her and bring her back to Athens with him. However, unbeknownst to her, on the way back to Athens, he dropped her off while she was asleep on the Isle of Naxos, and he completely abandoned her. You may have seen some neoclassical artistic images of sleeping Ariadne or Ariadne awakening. She literally woke up to find out that Theseus was gone. This must be a theme of mine that I really like, these abandoned women stories, because I ended up writing my thesis later on about Dido. But anyway, in the first portion of the piece, the first movement, the theme is that sleeping Ariadne who's awoken and realized she's been abandoned. You'll hear a lot of wailing and confusion in the solo flute line. And then when we get to the second movement, it amps up rhythmically, and that is the point at which the god of wine, Bacchus, comes down from the heavens and rescues her and marries her. They fall in love and they get married. And if we're to believe Ovid, then actually Ariadne was apotheosized. That's why it was included in Ovid's Metamorphoses. That was her metamorphosis, to be apotheosized. And we can still see her in the constellation Corona Borealis. And so you may hear us kind of drifting off into heaven at the end. And obviously I will be playing the role of Ariadne, and Joe will be playing the role of Bacchus. So I'm gonna let Joe describe a little bit the structure of the piece for a moment before you hear the piece.
Well, I'd like to talk just a little bit about the prompt that Steve gave us actually at the top of this concert, and that's like, what is American music? What does this mean? And Tobin touched on this a little bit too in the Ellington. And I think what you see, especially we'll see in the second movement, is this sort of application of improvisation or chance operations. And this is something that Lou Harrison was very well known for. And I think it's something that is sort of very American. And so you see it in the second movement, which is our sort of dance. If I'm Bacchus to her Ariadne, we sort of dance off into the sunset. And the percussion part is written just in one line. He gives you sort of a loose suggestion as to what instruments you might use. In this case, I have a conga and 2 bongos and 2 tambourines and a brake drum, although you could kind of mix this up in a variety of ways. But what you're sort of enabled to do as a player is to apply the single line of rhythms as you choose to the instruments that you have picked for your arsenal. And myself coming up as a classical percussionist, but also as a jazz drummer a lot, it's a lot of fun for me, just on a sort of spiritual level. And I mean, it really means that for me, no 2 performances are the same. But in addition to that, each line that we have for the flute and the percussion are allowed to be sort of ordered in any way we choose. So that element of it in this performance that you'll hear is not actually improvised. We designed sort of the order of how each line relates to the other, but no 2 performances from one set of performers to the next would be the same. So I think that's a really sort of fun, aspect of this piece, and a lot of Lou Harrison's music in general. So we'll let Monica cue up the show.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Congratulations. That was just great. I think everyone should unmute and use the reactions buttons appropriately. That is just great. Wonderful.
That's all I have now.
So I just have, I don't know if there's anything more that you would like to say after having seen that recording, and thank you again for accommodating your internet situation for us. But one of the things that I'm always struck by with Harrison is how elegant the music is and how song-like it is, even when it's really rhythmic. And is that how you conceived of it? Because the second movement, which you could really play with such bombast, was played with such lyricism. And would you tell me if I'm wrong about that, or do you have a comment? Oops, you're still muted, I guess. I'm seeing that. Just shake your head. So great.
We got it.
I'm muted now. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I completely agree with you. There's a lot of bombast and there's a lot of kind of a celebration that grows throughout it. And we really chose every lyrical kind of phrasing aspect of that piece because Lou Harrison has nothing in there. No dynamic markings. No, not a lot in the way of instruction or even phrase markings or slurs or articulation, anything like that. And if you look at our music, it's handwritten, it's really small, it's really hard to read. So we just kind of made it our own, and we wanted to tell a story with the piece. So yeah, we did decide to make it.
I think it sort of naturally, I think I might have said the word, but like it sort of naturally strikes me as a dance, like a pas de deux or something like that, you know. And it's like we're this couple, and you know, in our version telling of it, we're sort of apotheosizing or dancing off into the sunset or something like that. But I think no matter how you approach it, I think it to have that dance-like quality, it has to have a certain bounce to it, and I think you can only achieve that with a sort of lighter touch, you know, so to speak.
Well, it was so beautifully played, and the way that you mixed both the sort of the lyrical sensibility and the amount of rhythmic energy, I thought it was just really, really beautiful. And Jessica, I knew, but I'd forgotten that you were a classics major, and it's one of the many things that I admire about you, and we have that in common. I didn't major in it, but I think about that a lot, and you can see your. And I wonder if Joe would chime in on this, the sense of being attached to the story as myth. And we know that Harrison went back to classical topics time and time and time again. So I thought it was really fantastic that you can root your interpretation of that piece in these other things that come from outside the flute in the percussion realm.
Yeah, we love to do that whenever we possibly can. And as you mentioned, Harrison loved the mixing of cultures in his music. And I think you can hear a lot of gamelan in that, but all kinds of sort of Eastern influences. And I do absolutely love the story. The story is very important to me. Whenever you read a poem when you're like 14 years old for the first time, of course, that really sticks with you for the rest of your life. So that piece is something that really speaks to me. Something I didn't mention is the different flutes. He doesn't say anything about that in the instructions of the piece. We just thought it would be cool to create that growth and also the different textures adding to that Eastern feel.
Well, that's fantastic. And Joe, what about the percussion instruments? Are they of your choice as well, or are they stipulated in the score?
I've actually found a couple of different, one version that the first one I found had almost no instructions, and then I found a subsequent better looking edition that said 3 drums and 2 tambourines, and I decided to add a metal sound towards the end. And my idea, the way I structured it was like, you know, as the flute register builds, I wanted to add sounds to accompany and maybe like, you know, sort of increase the energy, not only with the playing, but the number of sounds that were going on. But I also didn't want to go too far. I think, you know, I think having, especially again, as like coming up as a drum set player as well as a classical percussionist, I always liked drum sets that were smaller, and I had to make choices with fewer objects. So to me, like having 5 to 6 things is a good like maximum number if I'm kind of improvising partially at the same time.
Well, I also think, I mean, we're looking at you in your home, your beautiful home, and the setup size is perfect. I mean, if you wouldn't necessarily want the Terry Bozzio complete set there to work on. Excuse us while we geek out on percussion talk. And
inside baseball.
You have done it with pots and pans in the past.
Yeah, we did one version on her master's recital at Rice where I used several. I used more stuff in general and a lot more metal sounds. But I was, I think partially because of the environment, but it's like we've done this a lot of times, and this is a totally different version in many ways than the last time we played it.
It's going to evolve more, I'm sure.
Yeah, your taste evolves and your choices in instruments evolve, or even change sort of weekly on a whimsical basis.
I think that's fantastic. And I noticed that I don't see questions for you in the chat line. They may come, but there is one to Tobin that I'd like to come back to that actually really connects right with what you're saying. And that is this question of when you have a difficult piece to play and yet you have a strong narrative or a strong story you're telling, how do you mix the two? And the question for Tobin was about Solitude, when you have to play the piece and you have to execute it, and yet you're imbued in this emotional environment. How do you balance those two things? And then maybe Jess and Joe would talk about the same thing.
That's an interesting question. I think it may sound almost cheesy to say, but I think my best performances, let's say that, of this piece are pieces where I really do feel some of that emotion, actually. I think I do my best performances, when I have that little bit of that pathos that the song is really about, and that sadness. Doesn't mean you necessarily have to feel sad, but you have to, at some level, I think, be in touch with it, have some kind of emotional access to it while you're playing.
That's a fantastic answer. I don't know if I've heard it expressed so concisely before, but that's really, really wonderful. And so Joe and Jessica, what about you? Can you separate the story from the demands of the performance?
Well, actually, that's what makes it so fun to perform as a couple, I have to say. I know, Steve, that you've had that experience a lot too, probably with your wife, that it makes it that much extra of a performance. Like, you really, really connect when you're connecting with a person. Actually, that's why we play music to begin with. Whether it's with the person you're playing music with or with the audience, you have to have something that you can grab onto emotionally. Otherwise, it's not going to be a great performance.
Well, I think that's also fantastic. Joe, do you have something to add to that?
I do. Yeah, I think that's really true. I think there is, of course, sometimes a balance. I think I like what Tobin was saying, because there is this sort of when you talk about being in the zone in a certain performance or some concept like that. I think it's often when you have just that perfect chemistry of you're meeting the technical demands, you're doing what you need to do, and you're very focused on that, but you have just enough of the emotion, the sort of feeling, the pathos, as you were saying, to sort of bring it to life, but maybe not so much that you lose track of exactly what you have to do.
There's balance.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's possible to be totally in control of where that balance fits day to day or minute to minute. I think that's the magic of why a certain performance is really good as opposed to a little chaotic or a little boring,
Well said.
Those are all just fantastic answers to, frankly, a really wonderful question, one that we do think about quite a bit. So thank you very, very much. And thanks for sharing your home and your beautiful performance with us. And congratulations from all of us to your family as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. TK, we're coming to you now. And I've been looking forward to this, mostly because I don't know this piece. I know the composer a little bit, so I'm really curious. And we'll start by welcoming you. Many people know TK DeWitt by seeing him on our stage as the principal bassoonist of the Breckenridge Music Festival Orchestra, but he is also associate principal bassoonist and contrabassoonist of the Kansas City Symphony, and he's been there since 2013. If we had been able to welcome you, you would have celebrated your 10th anniversary in Breckenridge. I'm not sure what the gift is for 10 years in Breckenridge, but we should certainly get you that, a good cup of coffee from across the street or something like that. And I love, again, as everybody knows, I love to read all the way through the biographies, because we know your husband, Brian. We always love seeing him in Breckenridge, but I was unaware of Abby, the Beagle. So it's wonderful you have a wonderful family. And where are you speaking to? Are you in Kansas City at the moment?
Yep, we are in Kansas City.
Fantastic, and thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to ask you a little bit about the piece you're about to play. But for those of you who might not know Adolphus Hailstork, he's a very prolific composer. He was born in 1941, and though he is an American composer, he studied with Nadia Boulanger. He did his work at the Manhattan School of Music and among other conservatories and training. And when I was listening this week in anticipation of listening to you, and I found this music to be really, it's rhythmic, it's robust, it's incredibly well made, and it's the music of a composer that we frankly should be hearing more from. And he is, I believe, still teaching. At least I could not find evidence that he has retired, even though he was born in 1941, teaching at Old Dominion University in Virginia. So can you tell us a little bit about the piece and anything you'd like to add to my description of Hailstork?
Sure. He actually just, like, very well timed for me, but he just had a Zoom talk with Lacolian Washington, who I share a teacher with. We both studied with Kristen Wolf Jensen at UT Austin. Lacolian recorded this piece, and so, I got to listen to Dr. Hailstork speak a little bit about it. But he did say that he's looking to wrap up his teaching career, but that his composition career would basically continue for as long as he could, which I thought was great. This piece was written for the National Association of Negro Musicians. They have from what I understand, a solo competition, and basically, in case you're not aware, there's essentially no solo music for bassoon at all. Probably our most famous solo piece, at least for our own repertoire, is a piece called The Rhapsody by Wilson Osborne, who's not a particularly well-known composer, but that's kind of, if you're going to play one solo piece, it's going to be that one. And then past that point, we get a lot of stealing from the Bach cello suites, or we take the flute partita and transcribe it, or that kind of thing. But I really wanted to play a piece that was for my instrument, and I learned of this piece through, basically, as we are learning from it. I went and watched a concert on Facebook from the musicians of the National Symphony, and their principal bassoonist played the third movement of this. And the third movement is really just like the whole heart and soul of the piece. It's marked slow and tenderly, and it's just really beautiful. And I was immediately kind of struck and taken by the piece. And so when you asked me to prepare a piece, I knew right away, like, okay, I just heard that piece. It was amazing. I'm going to learn more about it, find the rest of the movements. But it's really great. It's like a mini tour of all the different sides of the bassoon. The first movement, it's declamatory, but then also sort of shows off the what you might think of as stereotype, the humor of the bassoon. The second movement is like this super fast tour de force that's only 40 seconds long, and if you blink, you'll miss it, but it's fast and furious. The third movement I already spoke about, and is really just so well written for the bassoon. And the fourth movement is just like this kind of lilting dance between two partners. And so you have kind of the higher voice of the bassoon and the lower voice trying to do a little bit of audio deception to create those two different voices.
Fantastic. We can hardly wait to listen to it. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Fantastic, fantastic. Everybody can clap and use the reaction buttons. This is great, fabulous. TK, what I mean, just a chance to hear that sound you make again. This is just so wonderful, and to explore the capacity of the bassoon. It's kind of shocking that there's not music, solo music. It's so lyrical. It's so rich in harmonics and the spectrum. So I hope you go out and get a million more pieces to play as a soloist, because it would be really wonderful. And now that you've learned the piece, what speaks to you most about this music? And you know the composer, I imagine, and how does that combine with you when you know a composer, you're representing him or her in concert? What speaks to you about the piece?
You know, it was interesting. The more and more that I play it, and even now as I'm listening to it again, I hear so much Bach in that piece. There's so much in terms of the way that all of the voice, he uses the different voices. It reminds me so much of the cello suites, the Bach cello suites. And as I continue to sort of learn the piece and become even more acquainted with it, like I keep hearing different ways of finding those voice leadings and all of that I think is really interesting, and is it's kind of rare to be able to find a composer that can do that with a solo instrument. So I feel really lucky that we get such a great piece for our instrument, even, and hopefully it becomes much better known.
I agree. I think it's really stunning music, and as I said, he's prolific. He has so much music, and it should be played. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I'm scanning the chat line. I see any number of compliments. None with a question mark afterwards, but maybe there'll be a little time to chat if people want to when we are finished. But TK, thank you so much. That was just a gorgeous performance.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Let's move back for the moment to the Copland for a final excerpt of that. And I think it's important to note that the most famous music that Copland puts into the Appalachian Spring was in fact not his music at all, but the tune "Simple Gifts," which you all know, which was a Shaker hymn that dates, we think, to roughly the middle of the 19th century. And the Shakers themselves are worth talking about just a little bit. Shakers are basically ecstatic Quakers. They are transcendentalists at their core. They are deeply religious, but where the Quakers have a tradition of quietude, the Shakers are ecstatic. They moved. They felt their bodies. And amongst one of the most fascinating things about the Shaker religion is that they believe that the second coming of Christ would be a woman, and that one should look for women and support them in positions of leadership. This back to 1848, by the way, just for the record. And so this wonderful tune that Copland took and then created as a theme for a set of variations is at the sort of spiritual center of Appalachian Spring, and it's some of the best known music that there is. And so I think without any ado, Monica, if you don't mind playing for us this next excerpt of Aaron Copland's Appalachian Spring. Thank you. As Tamara said, afterwards we'll have a chance to talk to each other, so we invite you all to stay on just a little bit longer. But we call this evening American Landscapes for a reason. Each piece that we've heard tonight asks us to imagine the land that we love and the way we share it with each other. So if this music soars in your imagination, it's only because the land that inspires it also soars. So wherever you are today, whether you are looking westward towards the setting sun over the Pacific Ocean as I am, if you're in the mountains, if you're in the Midwest, in a city, in the country, I'd ask you just momentarily after we finish to step outside and breathe deeply and feel the greatest gift that we've ever been given, which is the land we walk on, and to realize that this, in fact, is the inspiration for all that we're doing here. We'll take that moment of thanks for this land and the life it has given us. So on behalf of Tamara and the entire team, on behalf of Tobin and Jessica and Joe and TK, I thank you for joining us here tonight. Good night and be well. Thank you, everybody. Tamara, back to you.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you for those wonderful closing words and for putting this spectacular program and commentary together. It was really joyful for all of us. And TK, Jessica, Joe, where is everybody else? Tobin, there you are. Thank you for joining us this evening from afar and sharing your talent with us. We miss those sounds coming from the Riverwalk, but are glad to have us here together in this unusual way. So thank you all, and please stay, chat, ask some questions, tell us about your meal. Feel free to share. Or also go to bed for those of you on the East Coast.
Tamara, what's it like there right now?
Oh, TK, it is, well, as you saw from some of the comments, we have a lot of smoke. Right now, Route 70 is closed for a major fire in Glenwood. And so it's been, I think there are several fires now popping up, and none of them are completely under control, but it is, we were lucky to have a very rainy July. So it's a little bit hazy from the fires, but still pretty spectacular in general. One night, this sun, as it was setting over the 10-mile range, was this burning red color, and it was gorgeous, even though scary in some ways with everything that's going on in the environment. But it's spectacular as usual. We feel very grateful for the summer and somewhat dreading the winter, although I shouldn't speak that out loud as a Breckenridge resident.
And it looks like from the news that they have basically shut down all of Main Street to cars. Is that right?
They have. I don't know if anybody else wants to. Actually, Dick Sausville is the chair of the tourism office, and this was an idea, I believe, that came from Lucy and the board of directors there, and it's been really well received. So I don't know, Dick, if you want to share a little bit.
No, well, thanks, Tamara, and thanks for a wonderful evening, by the way, too. It was great, both to you and Stephen and the group who put it together, wonderful. Sandy and Jane and so forth. Janie, rather. So yeah, the BTO worked with the town of Breckenridge to really kind of close down Main Street for the summer. In fact, we're going to take it all the way through September now. Town Council has approved that for the restaurants and retail outside on Main Street. So, and it's been very successful. If you, all of the Breck people, if you've had a chance to drive downtown or walk around, it's very active. And the month of August and July have been much better than we could have possibly expected with COVID going on. We've had, just a tremendous turnout of people using Main Street and shopping and eating and so forth. So it's been a great success. We're trying to figure out what to do for the winter, which is going to be an interesting challenge. But there's a group of people working on it, both Town Council and BTO and others, to really think of how can we animate the town in the winter and really do some things that we haven't done before with the trails and with the mountain and so forth. So it should be, I mean, it's been great. And the winter, we're very hopeful that once the ski area and the state of Colorado can decide, what kind of groups we can have on the mountain, that we can move forward with a plan.
We're here in Kansas City with TK, and TK, we just got back on Monday, and I think you wouldn't believe what he just said, how well Breckenridge was handled this summer. And I would add to that they established a mandatory mask zone 1 block east and 1 block west of downtown Maine. So when people hit that area, their masks went on, and they have them on for the whole time that they're down there. They don't have to worry about going in a place and putting it on and taking it off and whatever. And I think compliance there was 99% compared to TK. What is it in Kansas City? Not too good.
It's not great, unfortunately.
But it was a wonderful summer, TK, and I'm sorry you weren't able to be there.
Oh, me too.
Yeah, I think you made the right point too, that once everybody is masked up in the whole downtown area,
better.
It's much easier to stay masked, and unless you sit down to eat something, and then of course, it's a little different. But it's worked extremely well. Early on, we had some issues before the town went to mandatory masks, but since we went to mandatory masks, it's been great.
And we wish you were all here.
We do too.
It's pretty damn boring without you.
Well, and if you hear anything about the ski resorts plans, we're always curious to know. So we love the full report in the chat box for the next Applause at Home. Well, I mean, if anybody else has any questions, we're happy to stick around and chat. Otherwise, I think we'll call it a night and leave with that memory of the beautiful Copeland on our minds, and Steve, your words in our hearts. So thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to see you all, and come back and see us again for our final installment on September 4th. We'll have a Songs of Comfort, and look forward to seeing you all then. Thank you and good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye, guys.